The Fox News primetime special debate on congressional oversight and governmental accountability had been promoted as what network executives characterized as definitive confrontation between White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt, defending executive authority against congressional overreach, and Representative Jasmine Crockett, advocating for aggressive legislative investigations, with the debate explicitly framed as rematch between two figures whose previous confrontation 6 months earlier, during Leavitt's first weeks as press secretary, had resulted in what even Fox News hosts had acknowledged was comprehensive defeat for Leavitt. When Crockett had systematically exposed that her defenses of executive privilege claims were inconsistent with positions the Trump administration had previously taken, and when Leavitt had been left unable to explain contradictions that Crockett had documented through prepared evidence. Karoline Leavitt sat at the Fox News debate desk as youngest White House press secretary in American history, her appointment having been celebrated by conservatives as demonstration of new generation of Republican communicators who could articulate MAGA positions with polish and media sophistication that previous Trump spokespersons had lacked. Her return to debate Crockett explicitly promoted by Fox as opportunity for redemption after the first debate loss, with Leavitt having spent months preparing specifically for this rematch, including media training focused on how to avoid factual disputes where Crockett could deploy evidence, and instead keeping discussion at level of general principles where Leavitt's communication skills could shine without getting mired in documentation that had destroyed her in their first encounter. Jasmine Crockett had accepted invitation for the rematch, despite knowing that Fox News audience would be predisposed to support White House position, and despite warnings from advisors that Leavitt's months of preparation specifically targeting her debate style might create more challenging environment than their first confrontation. Her decision to participate reflecting confidence that no amount of media training could overcome fundamental problem that Leavitt would be defending positions that documented evidence contradicted, and that attempting to avoid factual disputes would itself become vulnerability when Crockett could expose that such avoidance was necessary. Because facts didn't support White House claims, the debate had been proceeding through opening statements and initial exchanges when it became clear that Leavitt was indeed attempting new approach, making broad statements about executive authority and separation of powers while avoiding specific factual claims that Crockett could fact-check, staying at level of general constitutional principles where her communications training gave her confidence she could match Crockett rhetorically. Without getting into evidentiary battles she would lose. Then Karoline Leavitt had made what would prove to be catastrophic decision, errantly believing that her months of preparation had equipped her to go beyond defensive avoidance of factual disputes and to actually attack Crockett's positions. On substantive grounds, she had launched what was clearly her prepared assault, questioning whether Crockett's constitutional framework was historically grounded or was progressive invention that contradicted founding-era understanding of limited congressional power. Delivering her attack with evident confidence that her preparation had finally equipped her to engage substantively rather than just defensively. Her decision to shift from avoidance to attack, clearly representing judgment that remaining purely defensive would make her look weak, and that Fox audience wanted to see White House representative aggressively challenging congressional oversight advocacy rather than just trying to survive debate without major embarrassment. What Karoline Leavitt had catastrophically miscalculated was that her decision to abandon defensive strategy and to attack Crockett's historical grounding would give Crockett exactly the opening she had been waiting for opportunity to demonstrate through comprehensive historical evidence that everything Leavitt had just asserted about founding-era congressional power was documentably false, that Leavitt's months of preparation had apparently not included actually studying founding-era congressional practice despite her attack being based on claims about that practice, and that Leavitt's big mistake was believing that communications training and months of preparation for avoiding factual disputes had somehow equipped her to win substantive historical argument against someone who had actually researched primary sources, while Leavitt had apparently just absorbed talking points without understanding that attacking on historical grounds required actually knowing the history rather than confidently asserting claims that comprehensive evidence would prove were completely wrong. If you want to see what happens when White House press secretary returns for a debate rematch after comprehensive first loss, abandons defensive strategy to attack opponents' historical grounding, and discovers that attempting substantive historical argument without having done actual research was a big mistake that transforms confident attack into even more devastating defeat than the original loss. Subscribe to this channel immediately because we are going to examine every element of why Leavitt's return was a big mistake, and why this moment became legendary for demonstrating that no amount of communications training can substitute for actually studying the subjects you're debating, and that returning for rematch with strategy of attacking rather than defending requires ensuring you've addressed the fundamental knowledge gaps that caused the first defeat. Leavitt's attack on Crockett had come approximately 20 minutes into the Fox News debate after she had been making general statements about executive authority. Apparently emboldened by feeling she was performing better than in their first debate, she had made decision to go on offense. Leavitt had said with evident confidence, "Representative Crockett has been making arguments about congressional investigatory authority being grounded in founding-era practice. But I want to challenge that claim because I think it's important for this Fox News audience to understand that what she's describing, aggressive congressional investigations of executive officials, is not founding-era constitutional practice. It's modern progressive invention." The Fox News studio audience had responded positively to Leavitt's shift to attack mode, clearly appreciating White House representative taking offensive rather than defensive posture. Leavitt had continued, "The founders created separation of powers precisely to prevent one branch from dominating others. They didn't envision Congress aggressively investigating presidents and executive officials the way Representative Crockett advocates. That aggressive oversight model is 20th century development by progressive Democrats who wanted to expand congressional power beyond constitutional limits." She had delivered what she clearly believed was her prepared coup de grace. "So, Representative Crockett, I'm challenging your entire historical premise. The founding-era understanding doesn't support your framework for aggressive oversight. Your constitutional arguments are built on historical foundation that simply doesn't exist. And I think the American people deserve to know that your advocacy represents departure from founding principles rather than adherence to them." Had been delivered with confidence, suggesting Leavitt believed her months of preparation had finally equipped her to substantively challenge Crockett, rather than just defensively avoiding factual disputes. But what happened next would prove that Leavitt's decision to attack was a big mistake. Crockett had remained calm during the attack, had pulled out extensive historical materials, and had begun systematically destroying every claim Leavitt had made through comprehensive primary source evidence. Crockett had responded, "Karoline, you just attacked my historical grounding by claiming founding-era Congresses didn't aggressively investigate executive officials. You characterized aggressive oversight as 20th century progressive invention. So let me respond by walking through actual founding-era congressional practice, using primary sources, proving that everything you just confidently asserted is completely documentably false." She had displayed historical documents in 1792, Jess. 3 years after Constitution's ratification, with framers serving in Congress, the House launched the St. Clair investigation examining General St. Clair's military defeat. This investigation demanded documents from President Washington's administration about military operations. Washington's cabinet, including Jefferson, Hamilton, and Knox, congressional authority to investigate and to demand information. The Fox News audience had become noticeably quieter as Crockett presented specific documented evidence contradicting Leavitt's historical claims. Crockett had continued in 1796. The House demanded documents from Washington about Jay Treaty, negotiations aggressively investigating executive decision-making during the Washington administration. In 1800, Congress held William Duane in contempt for refusing to testify exercising inherent contempt power against private citizen. Throughout the founding era and early republic, Congress aggressively investigated executive officials, military operations, and governmental conduct. The Supreme Court in Anderson v. Dunn in 1821 affirmed Congress's inherent investigatory and contempt powers as essential to legislative function. She had then delivered what would prove Leavitt's attack was a catastrophic mistake. "So, Karoline, every specific historical claim you made in attacking my framework was false. You claimed founding-era Congresses didn't aggressively investigate executive officials. They investigated Washington's administration beginning in 1792. You claimed aggressive oversight is 20th century invention. FALSEE dates to founding era, with framers participating. You claimed founding era understanding doesn't support my framework. FALSE, early congressional practice, established exactly the robust investigatory authority I've described. Your attack was based on complete ignorance of founding era historical record. And Karoline, this is your second debate with me. After losing our first debate 6 months ago, you spent months preparing for this rematch. And your big strategic decision was to abandon defensive approach and to attack my historical grounding. But you, apparently, spent those months on communications, training, rather than on actually studying the founding era congressional practice. You decided to make claims about. That was your big mistake, believe. You could attack on historical grounds without having done historical research. The Fox News debate studio sat in stunned recognition that Leavitt's confident attack had been even more devastating defeat than her defensive performance in first debate. Her decision to go on offense without actually knowing the history had transformed what might have been manageable debate into spectacular demonstration that she was unprepared for substantive engagement, regardless of how much communications training she received. Leavitt's face showed visible recognition that her strategic decision to attack had backfired catastrophically. She attempted to respond. Those are selective examples that don't represent the full, but Crockett had immediately cut her off. Karoline, these aren't selective examples. These are the founding era congressional investigations. Washington's administration was investigated multiple times. Early Congresses exercised aggressive investigatory authority. Supreme Court affirmed it in 1821. You can't dismiss comprehensive historical record as selective just because it proves your attack was based on ignorance. And Karoline, the Fox News audience needs to understand what just happened. You returned for rematch after losing our first debate. You prepared for months. You made strategic decision to attack my historical grounding rather than staying defensive. And your attack was destroyed through evidence, proving you made historical claims without knowing the actual history. That's not me being mean. That's what happened. Your big mistake was thinking communications training could substitute for historical knowledge when debating someone who's actually studied primary sources. The remainder of the Fox News debate proceeded with Leavitt visibly shaken, her confident attack mode having been destroyed so completely that she returned to defensive posture, but without confidence that strategy would be any more successful given what had just occurred. The immediate aftermath focused on whether Leavitt's decision to return for rematch and to attack Crockett had been strategic catastrophe, worse than her original defeat. Political commentators noted that losing first debate through defensive inadequacy was recoverable, but losing rematch through attacking on grounds where you were proven ignorant was potentially career-damaging. Even conservative commentators sympathetic to White House acknowledged that Leavitt's attack on Crockett's historical grounding without having studied the history was strategic error. Multi noted that she had apparently been poorly advised about whether to attack and about what preparation such attack required. Fox News audience reactions were mixed. Some appreciated that Leavitt had tried to go on offense, but many acknowledged that her attack being destroyed through historical evidence was embarrassing for White House and suggested inadequate preparation for the White House Communications Office. Having press secretary comprehensively defeated in rematch after months of preparation raised questions about whether Leavitt was equipped for role requiring substantive engagement with complex policy and constitutional questions beyond just delivering prepared talking points at press briefings. For Karoline Leavitt personally, having rematch be even more devastating loss than original defeat was career setback that raised doubts about her capacity to represent White House in substantive debates. Her decision to attack without adequate preparation had proven to be a big mistake that made her look worse than if she had maintained defensive approach for Crockett. Defeating Leavitt even more comprehensively in rematch demonstrated that first victory had not been fluke, and that no amount of communications training could overcome fundamental knowledge gaps when debates involved substantive, constitutional, and historical questions. In subsequent interviews, Crockett explained that she had anticipated Leavitt might attempt to attack her historical grounding. As way to go, beyond defensive posture from first debate, she had prepared comprehensive founding era evidence specifically so she could destroy such attack if it came. She emphasized that Leavitt's big mistake was believing that months of preparation focused on communication strategy had equipped her for substantive historical argument when she apparently hadn't actually studied the practice. She decided to make claims about that gap between communications training and substantive knowledge was what made the attack backfire so devastatingly. So, if this examination of how returning for debate, rematching, abandoning defensive strategy to attack opponents' historical grounding without having done actual historical research can transform potential redemption into even more devastating defeat, has shown you that communications training cannot substitute for substantive knowledge and that attacking on historical grounds requires studying actual history rather than just absorbing talking points. Subscribe to this channel for continued analysis of moments when strategic decisions become big mistakes. The Fox News debate, where Karoline Leavitt returned to attack Jasmine Crockett, was big mistake demonstration that seeking rematch after comprehensive defeat requires addressing fundamental knowledge gaps that caused original loss rather than just developing new communication strategy that attacking opponents' historical grounding without having studied the actual founding era practice being discussed transforms confident assault into even more embarrassing defeat than defensive inadequacy would have produced, and that sometimes the biggest mistakes in political debates are strategic decisions to go on offense without ensuring you've actually acquired the substantive knowledge such offense requires, leaving you worse off than if you had maintained defensive posture. That at least wouldn't have provided opponent with opportunity to prove through comprehensive evidence that your months of preparation somehow left you making historical claims that anyone who had done basic research would know were completely false.